We tend to think of history as, well, ancient history, right? Stuff that's just locked away in some dusty old book. But the story of World War II, that's different. It's really a story about us, about humanity pushed to the absolute edge. And what's wild is how much it holds up a mirror to our world, right here, right now.
And that really is the big question we're tackling, isn't it? I mean, how can a war from 80 years ago, a war that ended long before most of us were even born, how can that possibly be a mirror for our lives today? Well, stick with me, because the answers are, honestly, they're as surprising as they are important. All right, let's go right back to the beginning, because you've got to understand, this war didn't kick off with some massive epic battle. Nope, it started with something way more sneaky, and honestly, something that feels eerily familiar today. It started with a carefully crafted lie. So picture this. It's the night of August 31st, 1939. A handful of German SS guys, dressed up in Polish army uniforms, storm their own radio station in a little town called Gleiwitz. They get on the air, broadcast this fake anti-German message, and even leave a dead body behind to sell the story. The whole thing was a complete setup, a total fabrication. And what you're looking at here is the textbook definition of a false flag operation. The entire point was to create a plausible, believable lie, an excuse to launch an invasion they had already been planning for ages. It was just political theater, pure and simple, all designed to fool the public and give them a reason to go to war.
And this is where it gets crazy. Just look how fast everything spiraled. The very next morning, Hitler points to this fake attack and bam, he invades Poland. Only 2 days later, Britain and France finally realized that their whole strategy of appeasement, just giving Hitler what he wanted to avoid a fight, that it was a total failure. So they declare war. Think about that. In just 72 hours, one single manufactured lie threw the entire planet into war.
And, well, this is where that mirror I mentioned comes in. The idea of using a fake story to justify real-world action. In our age of social media, where information and disinformation spreads like wildfire, that threat is more real and more dangerous than it has ever been. It's a stark reminder that the first casualty of war is almost always the truth.
Okay, so let's move forward, because after that initial invasion, things got quiet for a bit. People called it the phony war. But then, the German war machine kicked into high gear, and for the Allies, it was truly the world's darkest hour.
I mean, nobody could believe it. France had one of the best armies in Europe, or so everyone thought. And they just collapsed. In 6 weeks, the German Blitzkrieg, their lightning war, just tore right through them. It wasn't just a loss on the battlefield. It was a complete and total breakdown that left the entire world just stunned. And just like that, with France gone, Great Britain was completely alone, the last democracy standing against this terrifying Nazi regime that had swallowed up most of Europe. Every single night during the Blitz, bombs rained down. People in London were literally sleeping in the subway tunnels, just trying to survive while their city was being destroyed over their heads. You just can't imagine the level of fear. But, and this is so important, in the middle of all that darkness and fear, there was this incredible spirit of defiance, right? It's perfectly captured in that famous line from Churchill. And the real lesson here, the thing that's so amazing about this moment, is what it shows us about resilience. The British people didn't survive because they weren't scared. They were terrified. They survived because they made a choice, together, to not let that fear win. So this is where we get to the massive turning point in the war. Because by 1941, you have to remember, the Axis powers looked absolutely unstoppable. They seemed invincible. But history has a funny way of teaching us the same lesson over and over again. That unchecked arrogance, that hubris, it almost always leads to your own downfall.
And you can see these two fatal mistakes happening at almost the same time. You've got Hitler, totally drunk on his own success, who decides to break his treaty with Stalin and just invade the Soviet Union. He thought it'd be a quick win. What he didn't count on was the brutal Russian winter and the unbelievable will of the Soviet people. Then, at the same time, you have Japan, looking at the US as this soft, sleeping giant. And so they attack Pearl Harbor. So what was the result? In their absolute arrogance, the Axis made the single biggest mistake you can make. They woke up two sleeping giants at the exact same time, the USSR and the USA. They basically started a war on two fronts against the two biggest industrial powerhouses on the planet. It was strategic suicide, plain and simple, and it was born from nothing but ego. And man, is that a lesson for the ages, right? It goes way beyond war. You see it in business, you see it in politics, you can even see it in your own life.
Overconfidence is this quiet killer. The moment you start underestimating your competition, or really any challenge you're facing, you've already taken the first step toward losing.
And those two huge mistakes? That was the opening. That was the chance the Allies were waiting for. And it's at this point that the great tide of the war finally starts to turn, setting the stage for some of the biggest, most brutal battles humanity has ever seen.
Take a look at this number. Almost 2 million. That's the estimated number of people killed, wounded, or captured in one battle, Stalingrad. It was a horrifying city-leveling meat grinder, but when it was all over, the unthinkable happened. An entire German army surrendered. And with that, the myth that the Nazis were invincible was shattered for good.
Meanwhile, all the way on the other side of Europe, you have this number, 156,000. That's how many Allied soldiers hit the beaches of Normandy on a single day, June 6, 1944, D-Day. To this day, it is the biggest amphibious invasion in the history of the world.
It was an absolute logistical miracle to pull it off, but for the men on the ground, it was a human nightmare. You had kids really, from the US, from Britain, from Canada, wading into a storm of bullets and fire, all to free a continent they'd never even seen. It was the beginning of the end for the Third Reich, but my God, it was paid for with so many lives.
So, as the Allies fought their way deeper and deeper into Germany, the very nature of what they were fighting started to shift. And this last chapter of the war, it's also the darkest. Because this is when soldiers, battle-hardened soldiers, started stumbling upon the concentration camps, places like Auschwitz, Dachau, Bergen-Belsen. And suddenly the war wasn't just about battles anymore. It was a crime scene. They were uncovering the systematic industrial-scale horror of the Holocaust. The world was suddenly forced to look at an evil so profound it was almost impossible to comprehend. And if there is one lesson, one single thing we have to take away from all of this, it's this. The Holocaust didn't start with gas chambers. It started with words. It started with politicians and media dividing people, creating an us and a them. And it was allowed to happen because of the silence of good people who saw it happening and just chose to look away. After that, the end came really, really fast. Hitler killed himself in his bunker as Berlin was falling apart around him. A week later, Germany surrendered. Over in the Pacific, the war came to this shocking, terrifying end when the US dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, unleashing a power nobody had ever seen before. And on August 15th, Japan surrendered. The war was finally over. But what did it all cost? Look at this number, 3%. That doesn't sound like much, does it? But what it represents is somewhere between 70 and 85 million people dead. 3% of every man, woman, and child on the entire planet at the time just gone. It's a number so huge it's almost impossible to really wrap your head around. Out of all that ash and death, new things were born, like the United Nations. The whole idea was basically, hey, maybe we should talk to each other so we don't end up destroying ourselves again. And that brings us right back to where we started. The biggest lesson from all of this, from this whole horrific war, is that peace isn't something that just happens. It's not the default setting. It is an active choice. It's a choice we have to wake up and make every single day, in big ways and small ways. So the final question is pretty simple. Are we choosing it today?